I see a clipboard going around. What is this clipboard for?
We're being paid to be here.
Okay, that's fine. Whoever's paying you to be here, please put them in touch with me so I can get some replication. That'd be great. So it is technically 14 minutes past, but I thought we'll start anyway because you've been patiently waiting for me to start talking. So I thought we'll get started. Anyone else who comes in later can just kind of awkwardly slide in on the back row or something. So thank you all for coming. This presentation I'm giving to you guys is titled What is Autism? My name is Richard Craik. I'm the Disabled Students Rep-elect for the UCLan Students' Union, and I've been doing presentations of similar ilk to this since 2008. And I want to start off this presentation with a little game to engage you guys, the audience. So, autism, Asperger's syndrome, ADHD, conditions like this are all known as hidden disabilities. Now what I want you guys to do, and don't be shy, I want you guys to look at this group of people and point out which one of them's disabled. Anyone want a shot? Anyone want a shot? Wait, who said that? Cool. So we've got a Katie that said it could be any of them. That is right. The idea of this exercise is that I want to put forward that the idea of disability in our society is kind of exemplified by the famous wheelchair logo. You know, you see it for toilets, you see it for parking bays, and if you immediately can't see an issue or a condition, thereby go, it's not there. So I wanted to start off by saying, with any individual, they could face their own issues, their own difficulties, if that makes sense. So next, I want to talk about something called the autistic spectrum. So what this is an umbrella, if you will, for terms such as Asperger's syndrome and autism and a few other conditions. And this means that each person who has the condition is affected differently. So there's no one-size-fits-all for autism spectrum conditions, if that makes sense. So no two people on the spectrum are alike. You'll come across some people with autism who struggle to communicate on a basic level, and then you'll have muppets like me who can't shut up. That's it. Laugh. You don't have to be nervous. So the reason I mention the autistic spectrum, autism spectrum disorder, autism spectrum condition for any teaching staff who are here is because that term may become far more common in the future due to changes in America under diagnosis. No longer will kids in America be diagnosed with autism or Asperger's, they'll be diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder or autism spectrum condition. And usually the case, whatever happens in the world of psychology in America, normally travels over to UK and Europe. So it's something to keep in mind. Now, I want to quickly talk about how does autism affect people, whether it's your fellow classmate students or the students you teach or, the colleagues you go into work on a day-to-day basis. So the first is that recent scientific studies and developments have found that those with autism, Asperger's, those kind of conditions have, in one way or another, a different form of brain chemistry, as shown on these MRI brain scans, where they image the brain and what responses it has to certain activities or questions. So this can lead to two things. It can lead to people diagnosed to have fantastic strengths, but also debilitating weaknesses. It can lead to bad social interactions and sensory issues, but we'll cover that later in the talk. So just going back to this. So I want it to be known that Asperger's or autism isn't down to behavioural patterns, as the science suggests at the moment, but it's down to development, down to how the brain develops in the womb. So, you know, it's not a case of behaviour, if that makes sense. It's a case of the brain is wired in that way. The way I describe it to people is this. Let's just imagine the brain has a series of wires. Wire A goes to point B goes to point C, in that kind of logical structure. Now, you take someone with autism's brain, and point A goes to point X. Point B goes to point D. Point C goes to point J. It makes no logical sense, which means that that person may have great struggles, but because of how that's mapped out, they may excel in some points. Now, regarding excelling, we go into interests, and that is that people with autism and Asperger's can take hobbies and fascinations to a whole new level, to a point where some may say they're obsessing about them or becoming completely fascinated with them. And this can lead a person with autism or Asperger's to become an expert in their field. So, you know, it might be that, you know, for me personally, one of my favourite subjects is business. I read business, I do business. That's why I'm here at UCLan studying business. If you'd asked me 10 years ago, everything was IT. I could tell you a lot of things about computer hardware. So from that point of view, if someone with autism can be coached to find that speciality and guided down that speciality, they could become the next geniuses that lead our knowledge of humanity forward. And as I said before, with the strengths and the strengths of knowing these interests and becoming so passionate and so knowledgeable about them, there are some weaknesses in conflict of that. So you might or might not know where this is. So I want to talk about the social aspects of autism and Asperger's syndrome, because there's a lot of kind of stipulation in the media, and a lot of people, I think, generalise autism. When you say the word autism or Asperger's, you think maybe socially awkward. So to the teaching staff, I want to say that, you know, an autistic student may not function well in groups. And I don't mean in the respect that they, you know, we might not say interact fully, but may just act not as expected. You know, they may shy into the corner, they may want to focus on doing the work by themselves. You know, there's not the regular group dynamic, if that makes sense. And this is a really important one. Strange non-verbal behaviour. Now, what's non-verbal behaviour? Well, it's said that the majority of communication is through things like body language. And people with autism and Asperger's really struggle to read that. And we're taught, ingrained, that in life, body language is key. So if you go to a job interview and you're not sat properly, you're not giving the interviewer eye contact, you're not going to get the job. If you're slouching and you're not giving them eye contact, it frankly looks like you can't be bothered. That would be a fair assumption, right? Now, what if I told you that some people with autism relate direct eye contact to the burning sensation you get when you get chlorined water in your eyes? Now, take that into consideration. Again, I said not all people with autism are the same. I'm lucky to not have this particular situation. But just think about that for a minute. So you're being drilled that you have to give this person eye contact, and your brain is telling you, you can't, it's painful. Where are you left? Now, the next two are kind of grouped together, and that is misunderstanding of common phrases and sarcasm. Sorry if the mic's a bit odd. And it links in with a black and white view of the world. So I'll give you an example. As far as social interaction goes, people with autism can have a very black and white view on the world. There's not much room for grey areas, which is unfortunate because the world we're in has many shades of grey. And things like common phrases and sarcasm, so, you know, you may think if you say, oh, it's raining cats and dogs out there, yeah, you may get one or two gullible kids say, oh my God, we've got to save the kids, we've got to save the cats and the dogs. But, you know, someone with autism may take that literally. And also sarcasm. So, again, if you're in a group situation or you're a lecturer, don't, you know, if you say sarcastically, oh, well, it'd be great if you went and wrote a 50,000-page report on this, don't be surprised when that student comes back with a 50,000-page report. Because sarcasm can be oblivious. Now, granted, again, it depends on the person on the spectrum, because everyone who knows me personally knows I sometimes get sarcasm, sometimes it goes over my head and I'm like, what are you on about? But also that I can be the most sarcastic one in the room, unfortunately. So, what I was going to say to that is, you know, if you're working with someone, you're teaching someone with autism or Asperger's, just be cautious on how you phrase things, potentially. So, this next one, I put about routine and time management. A lot of individuals on the autistic spectrum find solitude, they find peace in a chaotic, illogical world of knowing what they're doing throughout the day. So in schools and university, you know you're going to, I don't know, accounting class 9 till 10, you then know you're going to, I don't know, writing class 12 till 2, whatever it may be, you've got that structure. And people with autism may react badly if they find out that that structure is broken. So the best way to combat that is to be as forthcoming as possible, let them know as soon as possible, because it can lead to a negative reaction. If you'd have met me 10 years ago and the train was cancelled 5 minutes before on these days, I might go, stamp my feet, swear under my breath, carry on with my life. 10 years ago, literally that would have been the end of the world. That's it, the whole day would have been ruined. So, the next one that a lot of people don't know about is that I mentioned before about how the brain's affected, and it affects how the 5 senses are picked up by the brain. So, obviously we have the, you know, hearing, sight, taste, touch and smell, and I'll try and give some examples of them. So for sight, the way I describe it with all the senses is that people can have either a hypersensitive reaction or an undersensitive reaction. An example I give is a guy who I know who's quite severely autistic, and he has to wear sunglasses pretty much everywhere because he squints constantly, there's too much light for him, even things like fluorescent lights in shops, etc., blind him. The example of hearing, it could be that hearing is so acute that they could literally hear a needle drop it into a haystack. It could be that it's so attuned and so acute that in the quiet areas of the library, that one person coughing, accidentally, for no reason at all, sounds like a tornado or some earth-shatteringly loud noise has just erupted. Taste, there's been some recent research that suggests that some people with autism, I should explain, when I was a kid I was perceived as being a picky eater, but it was because when I had certain tastes or textures of foods, you know, consumed, my body would immediately reject them, say, get this out of my system. And of course the only way it can do, but I won't go into detail because some of you might have eaten. And it sets about a strange scenario, because if you're doing something that everyone else is doing, it's perfectly normal, but your brain is telling your body that what you're doing is perceived as a threat, what can you do? The next thing is with touch. So this is mainly more prevalent in younger adults or children, you know, like maybe a parent goes to hug their son or daughter, may not like that bodily contact. Another thing is that some people with autism will find certain materials of clothing very distressful, and by that I mean, say if they're wearing a type of wool or denim or any material you can think of, and may wear it and it irritates them to a point where they're scratching until they blister. You know, it can get that bad. Again, the brain is telling the body, this is a threat, don't wear it. And then again with smell, again, you've got the hypersensitive, overreactory version, and then you've got the version that can't smell much at all. And that can be particularly worrying. I used to be a mental health support worker, and I worked with an autistic individual who couldn't smell gas, which, as you can imagine, supporting them in a living environment isn't ideal should there be, I don't know, a gas leak. But another individual I ended up working with in that job could tell you exactly what scent of, she was very articulate, she could tell you exactly what shape, what different type of perfume someone was wearing, what brand it was, probably where they purchased it from if she wanted. So, why the face? You might think that, oh, this is a student who's just realised they've got 5 deadlines due tomorrow, and they've just realised that they maybe shouldn't have gone out drinking last night. But no, this is a reaction to what is called a meltdown. Now, what is a meltdown? Now, a meltdown can happen when the brain receives too much information. So I've explained to you that the brain processes things differently, that the senses operate differently. You've got issues with things like social interaction. And what happens over time, I describe it as getting a bottle of Coke fizzy drink. If you shake it enough, there's going to be a lot of pressure building within that bottle until eventually it's nowhere else to go. It's going to burst. And the way I describe it is that the individuals experiencing a meltdown, they're building up all this stress, all this pressure within them, and then it bursts. It goes everywhere, makes a huge mess, and then it's over nearly as quickly as it began. So what do I mean by this? I mean that they build up so much information and so much stress and so much anxiety that it can be seen that they lash out, maybe physically or verbally, to those close to them. And I mean in a proximity sense, or, you know, in a close sense of relationship-wise. Now, as I said before, pretty much as soon as they happen, they fizzle out, and then that person feels, once it's over, weak, scared, and defenseless. Because anyone who has autism will tell you, we don't strive out to have meltdowns every day. You know, we aim to not have meltdowns at all. Now, one thing that has to be stressed, again, this is more relevant in younger kids, but meltdowns are not to be confused with the temper tantrums. You know, you see the 6-year-old at the supermarket crying and screaming and lashing out at his dad or mum because they won't buy him the latest Power Ranger action figure. This is, again, completely different. This is where there's too much to cope, and this is the only way that the brain or the body perceives that they can release that tension. So I would describe meltdown as maybe an extrovert or an external way of getting rid of this pressure or this stress. The side opposite of that is called a shutdown, and this is the polar opposite. Instead of lashing out, it's bringing everything internalized. So shutdowns can happen when the brain receives too much information, and this is where it gets difficult, because if you've got someone with autism who doesn't socialize much on a good day and they go into a shutdown and withdraw themselves more, it means that the shutdown itself can be very difficult to detect. And with the spiral of negative thoughts, such as feelings of worthlessness, of doubt, etc., this can also lead many on the spectrum onto other mental health conditions such as depression. Now, I want to cover a rather controversial topic here, and that is, do vaccines cause autism? Now, when I was born and diagnosed in the 90s, there was a huge hoo-ha, a huge uproar that the MMR vaccine caused autism. And it led to lots of kids not being vaccinated, and the measles death rate skyrocketed. And the scientist who published this research was found to have not done the research correctly, and it turned out that he had his own agenda for publishing these studies. Other studies have countered his work and have proven there is no link between the two. But there is one man who is still adamant that it's the case, but I'm not sure whether we should take his word as gospel. Current President of the United States: autism rates are through the roof. Why doesn't the Obama administration do something about the doctor-inflicted autism? We lose nothing to try. So, I don't know, your own political thoughts on Trump, but I'm just letting you know, I think he's wrong on this one. So, the next one. I mentioned at the start of this, I've been doing talks of this ilk since 2008, and one of the first ones I gave was to my school. And the question was, can I catch it? Well, actually, the question was, hey mate, can I catch it or something in it? Which I think translated to, can I catch it like a cold? The beautiful thing is, no, you can't. As much as I would love to inflict you with social, I don't know, not being able to socialise very well and all this other stuff, it physically can't happen. As things stipulate currently, the theory is that it's passed down through generations of family. There's no known cures at the moment, there's no known cure. You're born with it, you die with it, simple as that. As I say, at the moment with science, that's the situation. And the next one was, can autistic people feel emotion? Now, anyone who's spent any considerable time working with people with autism will know that this is a load of coswallop. But there is a prevalent stereotype in whether it's media that people with autism either can't or struggle to feel emotion. And the way I describe it is this picture. We might be so confused or so conflicted, we don't know how we feel. We feel so bewildered. We're like, oh, well, what do we do? What do we do? Because of the situation. But yeah, I want to reassure everyone here that we're not emotionless robots. Just putting it out there. We're not Cybermen in disguise, as cool as that would be. Now, it's all very well me good standing here, telling you about what autism is, but if it's only 1 in a billion, what's the point? Well, when I was born in the 90s, the prevalence rate was about 1 in 1,000. Today's prevalence, put it at about 1 in 100 people have a form of autism. Some stats say it's as common as 1 in 60, but I use 1 in 100 because some will say it's 1 in 60, some will say it's 1 in 50, one will say it's 120. It's an average. Now, of that, 3 out of 4 of the people diagnosed are male and 1 in 4 are female. Now, there's 2 conflicting arguments on this. Some say it's because males are more likely to develop autism, and some argue that it's because the majority of research has been done on males. It means that the diagnosis procedure is less likely to pick it up in females. Personally, I think it's the latter, but we need to wait for the genius, the scientific community to figure that one out. Now, how can we relate to it? It's all right me coming here and speaking in this lecture theatre if you can't go away and think of something to relate to it, if that makes sense. So, I want to talk about some famous figures you may or may not have heard of, who have autism or Asperger's, who in one way or another have shaped the world. First is Bill Gates, richest man in the world for, I think, 15, 16, 17 years, something crazy like that, whose company Microsoft founded products such as Windows and Xbox. Next, Albert Einstein, great scientist whose theoretical models changed the way we look at physics and science. Next, film director Tim Burton, who has made loads of great films such as the recent Alice in Wonderland reboots and was arguably the man who made Batman cool again. And this guy, I can't pronounce his name properly, Santosh Tajir, I think that's how you pronounce his name. Does anyone have an idea what this guy created?
Pokemon.
He created Pokemon. So he used his autistic creativity to create one of the biggest intellectual properties on the planet. It's still growing, it's still expanding, and he's become a fairly wealthy man because of it. Now the next bunch, we've got Mark Zuckerberg, youngest billionaire on the planet, creator of a little poxy website called Facebook. I don't know if any of you have heard of it. The next is an artist by the name of Gary Newman, who was quite popular, I think, in the 80s for electric style music, famous for the song Cars, and most recent, Susan Boyle, who was famous for singing on, I think it was Britain's Got Talent. Now, there are quite a lot of things in media, films and TV shows that depict autism and Asperger's, and I want to cover some of them that you can take away, have a look at. You might think, oh, I see the connection. You might think, I'm full of it. So let's have a look. The first three are The Social Network, which is the story on how Facebook came to be, but this is back when they only had 500 million users compared to the near 2 billion they have today. The Fifth Estate, which is a movie all about WikiLeaks and the controversy surrounding them leaking the military documents during the war in the Middle East. And the TV series Sherlock, where it's referenced in one of the episodes that Sherlock may well have Asperger's syndrome, and it's kind of heavily hinted at, as well as being a sociopath. The next three, there's a series called House. Now, if anyone knows of Sherlock, House is very similar, except he's a doctor. So if there's a patient that comes into the hospital and they can't figure out what's wrong with him, they send him to Dr. House. And there's one episode in particular, I think in series 3, where he treats an autistic patient and all of his colleagues get a twig and think maybe he has Asperger's because of the way he reacts around people. The next is The Bridge. Now The Bridge, I think, is a Danish or Swedish crime drama. It's English subtitled. Really good series because the main two leads, the male and the female, they kind of flip the role. So the male detective, he's very emotional, and the female detective is very cold and calculating, and a lot of people have suggested that her character has a lot of autistic traits. She doesn't care about what people think of her, she's just there to get the case done with, and anyone who's interested of female figures in autism, give it a look. The next one is Doctor Who. It depends on which incarnation you speak of as far as Doctor Who goes. My reference point is Matt Smith's The 11th Doctor, my personal favourite. Again, he was interviewed about the fact that a lot of autistic people related to his version of the Doctor, and he said, well, he's not autistic, he's just an alien who looks human, which actually is quite appropriate because quite a few people with autism say that they feel alien with, involved in regular everyday life. The next is the A word, which is a BBC drama around the youngest of a family unit being diagnosed with autism and how the family reacted. It was actually quite interesting because you had the grandparents' age group reacting quite negatively to it, and the parents being quite understanding and the dynamics of that. So quite an interesting one to look at. The next is Doc Martin, a series on ITV about a GP, and he's got a lot of autistic tendencies of being rather, I think the word he used is brutally honest with some of his patients. And The Big Bang Theory, while I'm personally not a fan of the show, I've seen it, and there is a lot of examples with the two main leads of Sheldon and Leonard. Books. If any of you like reading, I'd recommend picking up House Rules. I can't pronounce the author's name properly, Jodie Pickwitt. That's the best I can do. But essentially, the story of this book is brilliant. So I won't spoil it too much, but again, it's of a family unit, a single mother and two sons, and one of the sons who has autism is suddenly accused of murder. And prosecution go through things like police interviews and may point out the fact he's not giving the police officers eye contact. He's got very strange non-verbal behaviour. The way he's talking, he's rambling. He's not making a coherent point. And there's a brilliant argument made. Is it because of his autism, or is it because he's guilty? I shall say no more, because it's a really good read. Couldn't put it down. The next two are very friendly picture books by Kathy Hoopman. One's called Inside Asperger's Looking Out, and one's called All Cats Have Asperger Syndrome. And I've recommended them to parents of kids newly diagnosed with autism because they're not scary. A lot of books have a lot of terminology in them and are very full-on in certain aspects. With this, it's just picture books. With the cats one, it compares cats' behaviour to that of people with autism. And it's beautiful. Just for point of balance, there is another book by the same author called All Dogs Have ADHD, which compares dogs' behaviour to that of people diagnosed with ADHD. And then the last one is Lives of Autism by Steve Mee, and this one's good because Dr. Steve Mee from the University of Cumbria, he gathered people with autism to write a chapter for each chapter of this book on different life experiences. So you'll have some on, sexual relationships, you'll have some on financial matters. I'm in for one of them, and I speak about my experience at the job centre and the wickedly wonderful, weird world of work. And next, a lecturer emailed me beforehand coming to this presentation and said, have you got any tips on how to teach someone with autism? So I've added in this little slide here. Again, similar looking scenario. So first thing I'd suggest is that you give the student clear, short and concise instructions. I say this because I've personally been in that lecture where you've been told there's no word count, but there is a word count. You have to work in groups, but you can work by yourself. You can reference these books, but don't reference these books. That's just going to drive that student loopy, to be blunt. They need to be clear and concise. If you're going to set a word count, it has to be that amount. Don't just change it about. If there's going to be a change of routine, such as a room change, do your best to notify the students, whether it's through the hubs or yourselves. I know it's not always the easiest thing with how timetabling and all the powers that be in the hubs not exactly being helpful all the time, but give it a shot. And the next being, if you're going to set a complex task and that student is struggling to grasp the task and you're hitting a bit of a communication impasse, split it up. So instead of giving them the brief as one great big long spiel, maybe split it up into 3, 4, 5 smaller tasks. Provide clear rules and expectations. So I'll give an example of this from a piece of schoolwork I did, not my proudest moment, I must say. When I say clear rules and expectations, what I mean is if a student comes and asks, so I'll give a brief example. So in an art class I was told, write down in this comment section what you think of this piece of art. So I said to the teacher, okay, so you want us to write down our own opinion of what we think of this piece? And they said, yeah. The teacher then had a go at me for writing down my opinion. Okay, so I said, it's pants. But in my defence, she said, write it down. So hopefully I'm making some sense of that situation, that clarification is key. Otherwise, you know, you don't want people saying your work's pants. So, given everything I've said about, you know, the five senses, the struggle potentially for social interaction, things like meltdowns and shutdowns, you know, the reaction of an explosive meltdown or introverting shutdown, I think the most important thing to recall for any lecturer is that, tutor or whatever the correct term is the student being disruptive and challenging, or are they reacting normally given their condition? And it's hard, believe me, it's hard, because if you've got if there's a student with autism who's just had a really bad day and something you or a classmate has said has just finally pushed them over the edge and they're in full-on meltdown or shutdown mode, you can't be seen to not be penalising, because then other students are going to think, oh, what's going on here? But it's a fine line of balance I'm not sure I can give the answer to, but I think it's something that everyone has to keep in the back of their mind. Because if it's a natural reaction for that person to do that, and it happens, is it that they're being bad, or is it because they're being them? And I'll give another example. This was from, I used to help with a support group back in the Lake District for people with autism, and someone there at the group was sectioned under the Mental Health Act. So he was rushed into hospital because he'd had chronic depression and a few other things along with his autism. And so they wheeled him in. He's in a ward bed. The doctor comes up to him and says, hello, we'll call him Jonathan. Hello, Jonathan. Tell me, can you hear voices? Now, it takes a second to think. Well, I can hear the doctor. I can hear his voice. So yeah, of course I can hear voices. I'm not deaf. Now, of course, when he said that, what he didn't realise was that he was going to be put on a ton of anti-psych meds, which then made his mental health go from, I don't know, let's say there's a graph, here's the top, here's the bottom, go from here to off the graph. It was only until a day later when his support worker was informed and brought in, did he manage to ask the question, well, did you ask what he thought you meant by that? Well, of course I can hear his voice, I'm not deaf. Of course I can hear voices. He's talking, I can hear his voice. So she. So, again, to us, that might seem like a very obscure situation or a situation that could never happen, but hopefully you can understand the paradoxical situation. But can you hear voices? Yeah, of course I can hear voices. You're talking, you're talking. So, what I want to do now is what I call a bit of an informal Q&A, where the following is the case. Anything goes, and I mean anything. There's no such thing as a stupid question. There's no such thing as an inappropriate question. But before we do that, I want to let there be a minute or two for you to all talk between yourselves, think of some ideas, and then we'll come back to it. And as I said, there's no such thing as a stupid question, inappropriate question, whatever. You can even say I'm an idiot. That's how open we're going to be. Okay, so I'll holler in a moment, and then we'll do that. Okay? Chat amongst yourselves. Yeah, you can say I'm an idiot. Okay. Yes.
So anything goes, you're right.
Yep.
You're okay with personal questions?
Yeah, go on.
Yeah. How old were you when you were diagnosed?
I personally can't remember, but I was about 3 or 4. It would kind of be before I had kinetic memory of it. I was a rare case because it was mid-90s, and Asperger's was only added to the medical diagnosis for the UK, if you will, in 1991 when I was born. So, yeah. But basically, my parents realised I was a weird kid and that there was something wrong. Okay. Yep.
Well, no, I've got plenty. I mean,
Yeah, come on.
I don't want to hug the floor.
I'm thinking, like, in terms of like assignments and assignment briefs,
Yeah.
given by lecturers, some of our assignments are like, I don't know, 1,000 words.
Yeah.
And some say 1,000 plus or minus 10%.
Yeah.
Now, if you set an assignment for 1,000 words,
Yeah.
could an autistic person not deal with writing 999?
I guess that really depends on the individual, because you said about the 10% plus or against. That's fairly simple to calculate. I mean that based on an experience I had as both a course rep and as a student this year, where for one class we were set no word count in one assignment. There's no word count, but a word count of 2,000, give or take 5 pages. Yeah, that's what I jokingly said to the teacher. I said, can we write in size 72? And they looked at me like I'd just landed from Mars. Granted, I just had, but that's besides the point. Okay, anyone else? Yep.
I think I know the answer to this question, but it's something that had never happened before in a teaching situation. Every year we have a dissertation conference and we try and show the students what they should and shouldn't be doing in that by having the lecturers deliver papers, but some of them really, really badly. And we don't tell the students in advance because we want them to work out for themselves and to know when something is a good paper and when something is a bad paper.
Yeah.
We also had a member of staff heckling during it to show them what it's like when somebody heckles you, and that the chair is supposed to deal with it. Had an Asperger's boy in the class at the front, and at one point I pretended as chair that I'd had enough because this lecturer was mumbling and the person was heckling, and I walked out. I came back in and he had clearly done something. I think he told the heckler to be quiet.
In a less polite manner, I'm guessing.
No, I think.
Oh, okay,
I think
right.
It was quite polite, but I went home very worried
Yeah.
that I had upset him, and also that I thought it was that he was thinking that we were all behaving in a very strange manner.
Yeah.
Because the person delivering the paper never delivers papers like that before. I would never not be kind to that person.
Yeah.
I spoke to my friend who's also got Asperger's, and he said it may have been the noise.
Yeah.
Somebody behind you constantly interrupting.
Well, I was going to say in relation.
My question is, should I tell somebody who I think might react that way in advance? Should I tell everyone in advance? Because I really didn't want to upset him, and it really worried me.
Well,
I had screwed with his head.
Well, I'm going to be, I don't know if the word's controversial or anything, but I don't believe in the idea of, in that situation, giving them up front, because there's always going to be situations in life where stuff's going to come at them, whether it's, a situation, I don't know, of a bank, a situation with HMRC, a situation with the neighbour that's unexpected and just jars at them. So there's that argument that, obviously we've got to prepare them for that. In regards to the noise, one thing that I forgot to mention in my piece about noise and background is that some people with autism describe that, so if I'm, say, speaking to this person here, and you're all chatting in the background, I'll pick up, so say we're talking about an assignment, I'd pick up, you're talking about your holiday to Barbados, you're talking about your assignment for Dr. Bob, and you're talking about going home early because you can't be doing with these students anymore or whatever, I don't know. But then in my mind I'm getting the assignment for Barbados is done because Dr. Bob wants to go home. And I'm picking up all that stuff and it's jumbling into a big squodge of stupid nothingness. Yeah, in that situation, I'd maybe, I don't know, have spoken to them afterwards and just explained that, this was just kind of like a situational role play or whatever.
He said he felt really stupid.
Yeah.
But one of the other lecturers has said, the point of this is to show you that when people are behind you when you're giving a presentation and everyone in the room is supporting you, that's wonderful, and you showed that you were supportive of everybody by doing that. So he said, okay, I didn't feel quite so silly.
Yeah.
But
Again, I'm not really sure if I've answered your question or not, but it's kind of the idea of, you know, maybe reassure after the fact, but I'm personally against those warnings because, again, when I worked before I came to uni, you know, and I didn't have safety warnings saying this manager's going to be well, I was going to say something else, but a not nice person, say. Yeah. But, you know, again, it's about, well, whether it's in school, university, or your first job, it's about prepping you for the fact that you are going to come across people in situations that you're not expecting, and you've got to be able to deal with them in whatever way you can, really. Hopefully that helps. Cool. Barry again?
Yeah, sorry. In your role as support worker,
Yep.
have you supported people on the spectrum who have either not had a diagnosis yet or have been diagnosed later on in life?
Yeah, later diagnosis is quite common, especially with girls, because well, I don't really know why. I think it's just because the way that diagnosis is done is more catered towards male brains, whatever the correct term is. Yeah, it's, well, again, 1 in 60 remark I put there, that was from some people saying that there's a lot of people undiagnosed. So if we took all the people who are undiagnosed along with those who are diagnosed, it'd be about maybe 1 in 60, but with those who are diagnosed only, it's about 1 in 100. In that role, I did support people who had autistic traits, but maybe had other diagnoses. Like, it's quite common, well, I say it's quite common, it's not uncommon to find that, say, someone with ADHD also has autism in some cases, or some other condition. Like I said, that, you know, some people with autism are quite prevalent to pick up depression. I should know I'm one of those people. It's because, you know, you get the idea as the autistic person that you're stupid because you don't understand the social qualm. You feel negative about yourself, and what's the saying? You know, it just spirals on and on and on until it's gone silly. Hope that. Go on.
I think you know the person. I'm tutoring this year someone who is going through the process of being diagnosed. He's fairly confident, and so are the people doing the
Yeah.
diagnosis. And having not seen the film The A Word, I wondered whether you'd encountered with supporting other people, whether you'd encountered that situation where she is terrified of the negative attitude that she thinks she's going to get from her family when she's eventually diagnosed. And I wonder what support is available either from people like you or whether the NHS has other counsellors and supporters that are about.
Well, as it goes, the NHS should, but in this current era of cuts and God knows what else, you know, it might be that it's there, it might be there's a waiting list at 7 years long. I honestly don't know. Regards of at least UCLan, there's obviously the disability support services, and then there's things like disabled student societies here. I mean, there's also I know you said about the repercussion. I'll give an example. When I was diagnosed, very young age, there was a fissure or a split down my personal family, where my dad's side of the family, who, this thing doesn't exist. He's just badly behaved, or his mother's given him some bad attitudes, or, you know, it's an excuse for bad behaviour. And that was because my grandmother, from my dad's side, was a social worker for the majority of her life. She'd never come across it, therefore it mustn't exist. Whereas my mother's side of the family were very supportive and were like, right, we know now that Richard's a mentalist, how can we support him? Don't worry, I say that very loosely, I only consider myself a mentalist. It's difficult with families, but I think ultimately they've, you know, reassure them that even if there's a problem with the family, there's other networks out there for support.
Readily available?
Yeah, well, again, with the services, I think it's in Foster Building 119, they should be able to help with signposting to necessary service, I think. And then there's also the EYES Emma Wellbeing team as well, at least here at UCLan. And then regarding the negativity of, not just outside family, one thing that autism has meant I'll never be able to do is join the military, because there's a blanket ban. If you have autism, you're not allowed to join the military in any way, shape or form. Which is all right, I suppose. It means I can't get drafted if World War III kicks off tomorrow. You know, given how the leaders of the world are very competent these days, like I showed you before. So, yeah, I mean, if someone with autism was very keen to go into the army, I'd maybe say, well, don't diagnose just yet. But that's about it. Other than that, as I show with the famous people examples, what's stopping you? Yep, Miriam?
You mentioned in
Oh, sorry.
the other question about to allow an autistic person to learn how to cope with the world, perhaps not singling them out and not helping them specifically. They said, like, there's one example, when I was at school, there was an autistic person in my class, and they wanted to reorganise the classroom.
Yeah.
So when they did that on break time, they called the person in, and they reorganised the classroom with them watching.
Yeah.
So that when the rest of the class came back in, they weren't shocked by the way the classroom had changed because
Yeah.
they saw it happen. But say if that person then goes on to university, a room could be different and there's no control over it.
No.
I've had lectures where my lecturer has told us to push all the tables together,
Yeah.
and we've forgotten to move it back up at the
Yeah,
end.
yeah.
So could that have been like a babying thing where they get so used to knowing how a class is going to look and they go to university or workplace?
Yeah. Well, that's why I'm very... Well, I'm not against the kind of the idea, you know, it's kind of I think a gradual thing, like, you know, when they're quite young, do that, but then as they're getting older, you know, do it less and less and less and less and less. Yeah, it's situational again to the person, because again, and how they develop. Again, me 10 years ago, that would have been me, end of the world, right, that's it, I can't do this lecture. I'll give a lot of you the tables in the wrong place. But, yeah, it's a tricky one, Matt. It really depends upon the individual. Can't be more help than that. So, gentleman there?
Yeah, referring back to your comments about late diagnosis, it's possible, presumably, for a 25 to 30-year-old to be undiagnosed.
Yeah.
If we as staff suspect a student has Asperger's or the spectrum somewhere, what's the best way of approaching it?
I'm not sure of a pathway for university. I'm familiar that in schools there's a pathway where the teacher can say to the school nurse, oh, I think Bob or Sarah might have this, and then it would be a way to refer them to the school nurse to begin that process. With universities, I'm not sure if such a provision's in place. I mean, it could be a thing of speaking to maybe their course leader or something like that, or if you know they're in some form of support situation, contact them.
Well, bearing in mind that kind of I'm their course leader.
Yeah, okay.
Okay. Is there anything wrong in approaching the subject fairly frankly? With somebody who potentially doesn't have a clue that they're...
I mean, you could maybe tiptoe around it at first and, say, oh, I saw this interesting, I don't know, documentary on autism maybe, and then see if anything twigs from that and see what goes on. Again, I'm not really sure. I don't know if I'm the right person to say yay or nay to whatever situation on that one, I'm afraid.
It might put often into the literature, sort of thought things as just sort of the signs and different criteria that are used to diagnose, just in a really sort of informal way to sort of maybe start them thinking about it. There's sort of a more informal way to approach it.
Yeah. It's various people within our department
Yeah.
have noticed unusual behaviours
Yeah.
which fit in with the patterns you've been talking about.
Yeah. Again, like the lady said, it might be best to go on that approach. That sounds sound to me, but I'm not, I'm not the, I don't have the knowledge or authority to say if it's the definitive right way to go about it, if that makes sense. Okay, yeah, sorry I can't be of more help, but I'll try. Sorry, you, sir. Sorry, did you have your hand up?
The spectrum,
Yeah.
is it graded like a colour spectrum? And if so, how can you identify the different stages or numbers on the spectrum?
Well, there is some grading. I'm not fully versed on that personally, but there's what's known as people who are high functioning and low functioning.
So the severity?
Severity, yeah. So I'm classed as high functioning because, you know, you might see me in the pub and think, oh, that bloke's a bit weird, but other than that, I think he's normal. You know, whereas low functioning tends to be more, well, the stereotype is the film Rain Man as one, or, you know, the stereotype of maybe, trying to think, I don't know, Sheldon Cooper from The Big Bang Theory is another one, but kind of your stereotypical, doesn't talk much, is very secluded, very intelligent, but lacks soft skills, lacks people skills, lacks that function to function in society sufficiently, perhaps.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Yep.
On the note of diagnosis, I mean, is your GP likely to pick up on someone on the spectrum?
Nowadays, more likely, but you still have to battle for it. I know I said I was young when I was diagnosed, and I can only say this through case notes and, you know, parents remembering and so on. And, you know, the GP we had, oh, it's impossible, this thing doesn't exist, it's a new trend thing. That was their point of view. So they really have to battle, go to several GPs in order to get through that point. Nowadays, it's a lot easier, but given stretched resources, etc., it's still a bit of a battle. But if you can if you can have some evidence or proof, like maybe, you know, the school's referred, or you can say that my child or my friend matches the characteristics, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I suppose it's even harder if they're older.
It can be the case, but, you know, I wouldn't rule it out. A case a few years ago, there was a 70-year-old man diagnosed with Asperger's, so, you know.
And the GP would refer them on to a specialist?
Yeah, again, it would go through a specialist, they'd build up the case, psychologists would be involved, and then through, the process has recently changed, so forgive my naivety because I don't want to give inaccurate information, but from that then psychiatrists would be involved, and then from that you'd get this, you know, document saying, congratulations, you have autism or whatever it may be.
I've got a young grandson who's diagnosed on the spectrum. He's in the staff now, it's 3.5.
Mm-hmm.
What would you, we've got a meeting tomorrow with like speech therapist, child psychiatrist, the school, when he's going to primary school. What is the best sort of like way to go forward with him? He doesn't speak very much at the moment, he's starting to say dinosaur.
Yeah.
So what's the best help do you think? I know
Yeah.
it's different, but
Yeah,
an idea of like how.
well, I mean, I think one thing you can do is, again, I mentioned before about the fascinations, the interests, those topics. If he's mad about dinosaurs, let him go mad about dinosaurs. You know, it could be the next, I don't know what the name of a scientist is who studies dinosaurs. Sorry? Paleontology.
Paleontology.
What they said, paleontology.
Autism friends.
Right. So yeah, I mean, it could be that they end up doing something like that because of that early interest age.
It's hard enough to keep them in mainstream.
It is a bit difficult. It may be difficult. Yeah, I wouldn't really be able to answer that unless I knew more about the situation. Yeah.
So it's more, at the moment he's struggles with speech, so it's hard to get into.
Yeah, it's...
And that's why I've not found it, don't know.
Yeah, well, it's the example I use for that, and this goes for everyone, where the way I describe it is there is, and this is a very crude analogy, I describe it as autistic English and English English, because you'll have the person with autism, regardless of their age, and they'll say, I want that chair. It may not come out as I want that chair, but that's what they think they're saying to you. And you're saying, I don't understand. They're then getting frustrated because it's obvious that you want that chair, and you're not picking up on it, and then that's where the frayed situation comes in. And There you go. Another example I'd give is if you were, say, in the middle of continent Spain and you knew nothing of the Spanish language and you were trying to ask a local where the train station is, and you were reverting back to primitive, I don't know, sign language, like, and they were looking at you like you'd just been released on day release. They're like, what's this guy? And you're getting frustrated because obviously that means where's the train station?
Another thing you said keep saying 10 years ago I wanted to go with this.
Yeah.
10 years ago I wanted to go with that. What were you putting in place in 10 years ago?
It was kind of being, I can't think of the correct word. Well, it was kind of, I read up a lot on the subject, but also I exposed myself a lot to things I didn't feel confident with or felt uncomfortable with. So like with these talks I've been doing now nearly for 10 years, the first idea of it being proposed to me, I thought, no way. The idea of, in the world of work, of, co-working with co-workers and managers, etc. Again, back then, I'd still have a go at it, but I'd really struggle with it. But it was only through doing it. I know it's a bit of a...
Are you supporting yourself through that or to get this?
I generally have to support myself through it, but I should stress it was because of family or friends having a good backbone, because then if I had a problem, I could go back to them and say, "Oi, my manager's he's a bit of a moron," or whatever it may be, for example. Yeah, I can't think of much else really for that point. It's just because at that age, yeah. So I'm not really sure what else I can suggest. Well, what I'll do at the end, come down. I've got some business cards here, and then we can speak more after this. Okay? Yeah, go for it.
Both on the house desk, reception and disability services.
Yeah.
And students come and chat, and some just want to chat, they want to talk about their disabilities. Someone on the spectrum, which I sometimes think all hundreds are on the spectrum, and I'd like to chat to them, but would they feel comfortable with me asking questions? Or probably
Again, it depends. Yeah, it's individualised. I mean, you could hint at it and see where you get from that.
I can usually feel like no.
Yeah.
Especially if you're not getting the eye
If the
contact.
trains are quite shut down,
Yeah.
quite reserved, and you can, it's obvious, but you know that maybe questioning a bit more would make them feel uncomfortable.
Mm.
I suppose that's what you're getting at. Would it send them into a meltdown if you started asking them what's the question?
Well, I mean, everything with meltdowns is it tends to be over a prolonged time. It's not just that one thing that sets it off. It's a series of events that build up that pressure, and then it'll be the minute little thing a few days later that set it all off. So it may seem like an overreaction from I've moved your pen over there or something, but it was because the day before an assignment deadline was changed, and the day before that you were told that you had no word count and a word count and, all that other kind of stuff. I'd say similar to what the lady said here before, which was try and get maybe some literature about it, and perhaps you can give it to them to look over. Some people, it's difficult because some people won't mind, or they'll be brutally honest and say, "I think this."
Naturally chatting.
Yeah.
Chatting with others. Or, yeah, as you say, it depends on the individual.
Yeah. I mean, there's no harm in giving it a try, really. No.
I've tried to do that.
Okay. Gentleman there?
I've been reading on the National Autistic Society that they're trying to get in, they're trying to tell governments to put in law that allows the employees should know or be autism aware, because I suffer from Asperger's myself, and obviously I'm a student ambassador as well. I just thought I'd ask you on your thoughts about, because I think they should do it
Yeah.
in law.
Yeah.
Because I've worked in the past with some employers which they're a bit unwary what autism is.
Yeah.
And obviously that affects co-workers as well.
Mm.
Because it's like, for me, it's
Yeah.
all the time. But obviously with my co-workers, it's sort of like, etc.
Yeah, it makes sense, don't worry.
I just thought I'd ask you a question about what's your thoughts.
I think, well, there's already the Equal Opportunities Act 2010 that states that everyone must be treated equally in the workplace regardless of disability, religion, race, etc., etc. Whether or not that's put into principle by every employer, you know, we'll see. It's, you know, you'll get some brilliant success stories and then you'll get some freakish horror stories. You know, what I've spoken to some businesses and I've said that, you know, you get a worker with autism whose passion is about your product and has a hyper focus for your product. They have the potential to be the best employee you've ever had. An example I give is, you know, somebody whose fascination is about cars. They become a car salesman. They can tell the potential buyer how many brake horsepower it's got, what the engine was, and which cow made the leather seats. You know, they know everything about that product, right down to every minute detail. I think it's a good proposal. Whether or not this government will pass it is debatable. Anyone knows me personally knows I'm a big fan of the current administration. And FYI, sarcasm. And I think I think the problem is that a lot of employers get a bit scared by it. And what I'm about to state is illegal, but I've no doubt that it happens. Is that on a lot of job forms, there'll be a little section that says, "Do you consider yourselves to have a disability?" or something of that ilk. And if you put down autism or Asperger's, you know, now this is a hypothetical scenario. I'm a person going through the CVs and I'm going, right, okay, the Joe blogs, blah, blah, blah. Oh, this great CV did it. Oh, it has Asperger's, right, okay, what's that? Goes onto Google, what is Asperger's syndrome? Sees that thing, gets a bad bit of news that says, oh, they can't talk to people. Well, how's Joe Blogs going to be a salesman if he can't talk to people? You need to be able to talk to the client. Next. But then what I've just suggested there would be against the law under the Discrimination Equalities Act. But what I think happens is that if you inquire, if that person inquired and said, why didn't I get the job, they'll say, oh, you didn't have sufficient experience, I'm sorry, or, you know, someone else fitted the bill better than you did. And I based that off an investigation, I think it was Channel 4 did a few years ago, where they applied for several jobs, where one person, the CVs were all identical, the only thing that was different was the name, and under the disability field, on one they said autism, one they said paralysed from waist down. The majority of the people asked for interview were able-bodied. When they were quizzed, they said, oh, the other people weren't experienced, but we knew that they were just as well experienced. And I've kind of gone on a deviation there, but I'm just trying to explain my point. So yeah, I just think, well, that's why I do my talks. That's why I think it's important to get awareness out there, because, you know, out of this room, majority of you guys, student-wise, could be the employers of tomorrow. So hire me. But other than that, you know, I think it's important that. Can I ask what subject is it you study?
Web design and development.
Right. Okay. So all you've got to do is really push out there that your niche is that. You know, that is going to be your key skill, if that makes sense. And then employers will look straight past that and say, this guy or girl's amazing. We've got to have them on our team, regardless. Anyone else? Gentleman there?
How would you go about promoting autism, promoting awareness of autism in, say, for example, say you're in the supermarket and you can see something's going on, how would you deal with people that weren't as educated as specialists?
So you mean if I saw someone with autism in distress, you mean, or?
Say if, for example, my niece is autistic and she goes into meltdown fairly regularly.
Mm.
As somebody that was maybe taking her out on a trip somewhere and she went into meltdown out in public, how would you deal with people looking in, and how would you deal with that situation?
Well, the sad reality is that you're always going to get people look, because it's part of the human condition. It's the same reason why when you're driving down the motorway, traffic always slows up because they want to see which numpty crashed into the caravan. You always get that thing where people want to look and see, oh, what's occurring, what's the situation. In regards to how to bring someone out of that, if you're in, say, a supermarket, try and remove them from the situation. Take them outside, let them get fresh air. In regards to that, also have a chat to us, see if she can, whether it's through speech, maybe writing it down, to try and articulate what it is that she finds distressing about going to a supermarket. I'll give an example. Remember I said about how certain sounds are perceived differently? One person from that support group I mentioned before, the idea that fingers on chalkboard kind of grates to your spine. Is anyone familiar with that idea that you grate around and everyone goes like that? Someone I know gets that from the beep of a checkout machine. So every time there's a beep beep of a checkout, it grates down to their spine. To a point where the way they cope, they wear noise-cancelling headphones every time they go to the shops. I gave the other example of the guy who's always squinting, constantly wears sunglasses. So while I can't give you a definitive answer, I think it's a case of trying to find out what it is in particular and then trying to find a way to combat it, if that makes sense.
That's a bit problematic in and of itself.
Right.
She's only very young, she's 3.
Right.
And she, like the previous example, has issues with forming words.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I mean, again, with that situation, in that situation, it'd be a bit easier to remove them from the situation versus, if it was a guy who's 7'8" and, hulking, to remove them, physically remove them from the situation if need be. I can't give a definitive answer because, again, it's not, I can't. See, I've got that problem now. I can't articulate what I'm trying to say. It's embarrassing. That's all right. Yeah. As long as you're awake, that's all that matters. I'm sorry, Matt. I can't think of much else other than try and remove from the situation and try and see if there's particular stimuli that he or she reacts to, I should say. Yeah, that's all I can suggest, really, I'm afraid. Any other?
I just wondered, you said you're high functioning.
Yeah.
Do you think that's because you've had the right support, from family and everything, or do you think you would be high functioning if you hadn't had that support?
I would still be high functioning if I hadn't had the support. However, I wouldn't be able to stand here and speak and do what I'm doing now. I wouldn't necessarily put it all down to support. Again, it's kind of been a mix of kind of putting myself in situations that made me feel uncomfortable, but also support friends and family. Because when you say support, I think of the official support systems like in school, and my school support system was very hit and miss. I had one person who was very good, and then I had one person come in and explain to me the invisible toolbox method, which I thought was crazy, which I can go into in a bit if you want me to. And yeah, I think, yeah, it's possible to, teach or learn techniques to cope with certain issues. Like, I'll give an example. Although I hopefully I seem somewhat eloquent in socialising with you guys, come the end of this event and the event I'm going after this, I'll go home and I'll be physically exhausted, like I've run a marathon, because social interaction, I feel after doing it, I feel like I've run a marathon. So I'll go home and I'll be like, whew, I'm out for the count. So yeah, it's all about kind of knowing your limits and trying to push them, if you will, because you won't know how far you can get unless you push those boundaries. Hope that answers your question. Yes?
From an employer's perspective, so if, say, an employer had a job application that said, okay, this person's on the autistic spectrum, is it fair to that autistic person to put them through the normal recruitment placement year, I had a group interview where I'm sure you've seen the kind of activities. The boat is sinking, there's only enough space on life, but for 5 people there are 10 people on the boat, and as a group you've got to argue and debate over who should be saved and who shouldn't, and those kind of activities. We had that kind of situation, and I'm sure that thinking about what I had to do for my placement, I think an autistic person could do it.
Well,
however, in that interview they probably performed very badly.
Yes, I think it's a case of you know, if you know that, just perhaps mentioned, you know, that it's a hypothetical. I mean, I'll give a brilliant example. When I was learning to drive, my driving instructor rather bluntly said to me that he had one lad with autism learn to drive, and are you guys familiar with the emergency stop manoeuvre? So what he said, so we're driving along, and he goes, look out, there's a small child in the road, expecting him to stop, and he just goes, no, there isn't, and just kept going. Because there wasn't a small child in the middle of the road. But then he failed his mock test because he didn't stop. He said, but there wasn't a child there. If you said do an emergency stop, I'd have done an emergency stop. So, again, I've those kind of activities for, like there's 10 people on the boat or 10 supplies and all that. Lovely icebreaker activity that they make us all do in all these kind of situations. I think it's a case of just keep, you know, from an employer's perspective, if they've declared it, keep it in mind as they're going through the process, if that makes sense.
But still put them through the normal recruitment process.
Yeah, well, I'd be tempted to not exclude them from that, you know, but I'd be, you know, I'd keep it as a, what's the word, like, you know, as a side note behind, what's the word I'm looking for? Keep aware of it. Damn, I'm struggling to eloquate my words now. This is really stupid. Yeah, am I making sense?
Yeah.
Thank God for that. I don't understand myself half the time. Good. Any other questions?
Very quick question.
Yep.
From your experience in the working world, has there been any kind of strategies that employers have used that have been really helpful to you?
Yeah, there was one who, if he saw things were getting too much to me, he would let me go and take 5 minutes outside, get some fresh air. And that was simply down to the fact that his son was autistic. So, you know, he knew similar methods, and he was like, look, if anything's too much, and, you know, problem with a computer system, I went, right, I'm sorry, I need 5 minutes out, went out, 5 minutes, came back in, oof, right, I'm ready to get back in there. I personally do, because I don't feel, well, I feel, a lot of people say they feel ashamed. I don't feel ashamed, but I feel that it's fair on them, so that if anything ever did come up, they'd at least have some inkling of what was going on. And then it didn't look like, oh, here's this weirdish guy having a full-on breakdown, you know, quickly call the men in white coats, you know. Yeah, but for some people it might be something else. It might be, you know, that they listen to noise cancelling. So another example, I worked in an open office for a time. The only way I could cope with that was to put in noise cancelling headphones. I didn't have any music on, but it just shut out all the rest of the noise around me, so I could just plod along with what I was doing. Yep. Probably 2 or 3 weeks ago. And that was because I had, well, I've already given the example of this assignment where there's no word count, there is a word count, there's no page count, but there is a page count. You have to do it in groups, but it can be individual and all that other stuff. It's being dealt with, so I'm fine on that front, but it was just the frustration of I feel like I was trying to get it, but it just felt like I was headbutting a brick wall, if that makes sense, or a glass wall, because I was like, right, I'm trying to get the grasp of it, whereas other students on the course had kind of gone laissez-faire and gone, oh, bugger this, I don't get it, I'm not going to try, you know, I'm bored, lol, do you want to go Snapchat? You know, whereas I'm just fair, like, right, I don't deserve, how does this formula work and all this other stuff? And again, it was with myself and my teacher, it was the famous, again, autistic English, you know, I was saying, I don't get this, and they're like, well, why don't you get this, it's this, and yeah, it was, although to be fair, it was a combination of about 4 or 5 months. So it wasn't like just one disagreement at the end of one class set me off.
Are you all right with this sort of question?
Yeah, go for it.
How frequently noticed any difference from being here?
Yeah, well, I'd say it's once every couple of months, so, because again, it's kind of a build-up of kind of stress or anxiety or things like that.
The pattern that you've always had?
Some, well, no, when I was in like secondary school, it'd be maybe once every couple of weeks. So it's got better, but I'm just yeah, the way I see it is I'm just a bit of a weird bloke. Yeah. Yes, gentleman there.
Do you find that having something that you can do that acts as like an outlet is very helpful?
Yes, when I was a younger kid, I was one of those controversial rebel kids who got to play those violent video games, Grand Theft Auto, when I wasn't 18. But to me, instead of going and chucking a chair across the room because I was frustrated, I'd go on Matt and destroy some pixels. You know, a lot of people would say, "Oh, these kids make games violent. These games make kids violent." But to me, it was a way of me just outletting my anger and just saying, "Right, okay, I've killed some pixels. Whatever will I do?" You know, for some people, actually, there's an invention going around the internet quite recently called the fidget cube, and it's a little cube which has little buttons on you can click and all this other stuff. I have one of those. That's also a good way of dealing with the stress or anxiety. I think they're about £5. I wouldn't spend more than £5 on one though. But yeah, it depends on the way, it depends on the product. Yes.
I just wondered, I'm planning to be a nurse. I just wondered if a patient had a meltdown.
Yeah.
Would you say the best way to approach it usually is, like, say if you're having a meltdown, would you like to sort of not be touched, not be spoken to, just be left, or is there something you can do to reassure them?
Well, what I'd say is you kind of reassure them that they're safe. I'd try and keep out of the way.
Yeah.
But, you know, obviously if you're in a hospital situation, it could be that, you know, if they're thrashing around or something and there's poor Bob over there with life support in him and, you know, you're not the thing when he's dead, then, you know, you've got to restrain him. So it's kind of only use that kind of touch or force if absolutely necessary, because it was the same thing I learned when I was a mental health support worker. You know, restraint is absolutely the last thing you do. Yeah. Anybody else? Gentlemen?
Where can tutors, teaching staff, find more information on how best to support students with autism? Things not to do in the classroom or things to do because it's their preferred way of learning?
I just love how everyone was just like, and then chung, at the same time, like, yeah, I think that's a good question. Well, obviously there's the disability services here at the university, and regards of that, they I guess, yeah, they should be, yeah, how are they? Yeah, getting out. Sorry, yes?
Just in answer to your question there, I'm from disability services. So,
Saved by the Bell.
yeah, you should really contact us. Disability advisors can talk to you about individuals if confidentiality is allowed. And we might be able to give you some tips and advice. There is information on the web as well. We can direct you to that. But it is a very individual thing, isn't it? Richard?
Yeah.
That's the thing. I mean, I've been working in disability services for 10 years, and I can't say that I can describe a student with autism
No.
or with Asperger's.
You can give.
Everyone is very, very individual.
Yeah, again, you can give characteristics. Like I said at the very beginning of a presentation, everyone's different. You'll get some who struggle to communicate at all, and then you'll get muppets like me who can't shut up. It's as simple as... Mrs. found that funny. Yeah, you always get kind of a different situation. So yeah, I'd speak to them and see if they can provide information, because it's more of a generalised guide with, you know, the characteristics I've shared, because not all of those apply to me in the same way that if there was someone with autism sat there, not everything there would apply to them. If that makes sense.
Thank you.
No worries.
We've got to go. Thank you. It's been very interesting.
No worries.
I'll give you an email.
Okay, cool. Oh, sorry, you wanted a business card, didn't you? Was it you? Yeah. Just come down, grab one. I'm going to do 2 more questions and then we'll call it an evening. That's all right.
Yeah, he's got an
another event like straight after.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I've got another speech to do straight after this at the other end of campus. So, two more, if there's two more, I don't know. Yes?
So, sorry, it's me again.
That's all right.
Your list of films and plays and books and stuff.
Yep.
Why not Curious Incident?
That is a good one.
It's just the best that I've seen. I've seen it live, I've seen the live stream as well, and the
Yep.
book. And for anyone who has never encountered anyone on the spectrum,
Yeah.
just the most
The reason, I'll be honest, the reason it's not on there is because I forgot to put it on there. That's the honest truth.
and the good thing is there are plenty of YouTube clips of it as well.
Yeah.
Really pertinent that you could intersperse.
Sounds good. Anyone else? Last one of the night. Yep.
I have a friend that's on the spectrum.
Yep.
He has meltdowns. I'm not 100% sure how to deal with it. I tend to just leave him to it and then
Yeah.
just move on from the situation. Like,
Yeah, that tends to be a good way to deal with it because, as I said in the presentation, no one with autism strives out and goes, right, today I'm going to go to class A, B, and then I'm going to have a meltdown and then I'm going to go and have a cup of tea. Not going to happen. It's kind of the last thing you want as a person with autism or Asperger's. And I think the best thing is for you as a friend to be cautious of it, to remove yourself from a situation so that you're safe, so that, you know, some people physically lash out at inanimate objects and things. Just remove yourself from a situation and just be understanding and just say, look, I'm here, I get you, and it's okay. Because, again, as I said before, is the person being challenging because they're being challenging, or are they acting normally within the remit of their diagnosis, if that makes sense? Hopefully I'll answer your question. So, because it's 1:45 and I've now got to trail over to Brook Building, I'll call it end. If anyone wants contact details, there's my website there, or can hand out business cards to anyone who wants them. Cheers.